windowsill. Been so lonesome chasing that morning chill. Oh, little red bird, open your mouth and say, been so lonesome, I just about flown away. So long now I've been out in the rain and snow, but winter's come and gone, a little bird told me so.
Hello, and welcome to the How I Healed podcast. I am joined today by my co-host, Mary Lou Singleton, who is a family nurse practitioner, herbalist, and apprentice-trained home birth midwife. She has been caring for the health of New Mexican families for over 25 years. Mary Lou believes all healthcare modalities, from allopathic medicine to energy work and everything in between, have healing potential. That healing is always an individual journey to be supported by community, and that when it comes to healing, effectiveness is the measure of the truth. She is a critic of the pharmaceutical industry and the mainstream medical industry, which promotes drug dependence and chronic disease maintenance rather than healing. She believes healing is always possible and co-created the How I Healed podcast to share stories of healing, hope, and recovery.
Thanks, Jocelyn. I'm Mary Lou, and I'm here with my lovely co-host, Jocelyn McDonald, who is an artist and storyteller. She is enlivened by the infinite potential of humans to heal and helps others walk this path through her art and music. Her healing practice focuses on making and finding meaning out of the crises and major choice points of our lives. She offers one-on-one support through coaching and archetypical astrology and tarot. She specializes in assisting with psychedelic integration and pharmaceutical cessation.
Welcome back to the How I Healed podcast. We are so happy to have with us today Siobhan Azgharzadeh. Siobhan Azgharzadeh is a certified birth and death doula and life passages mentor. She is also a pilgrim and has walked her prayers for over 15 years after her first pilgrimage on the Camino de Santiago. Siobhan is dedicated to re-enlivening the old way of walking as journey into soul territory, seeing the deep cultural need for more grief-literate support for those who have experienced loss. Siobhan created Grief Pilgrim as a pathway to a more generative relationship with grief, and you can learn more about that at griefpilgrim.com. So, Siobhan, welcome to How I Healed. We're so happy you're here.
Thanks for inviting me. It's so wonderful to be with you both this afternoon.
We like to just open it up really wide. Tell us your story of how you healed.
No, I love it. And
Okay.
there's so many threads to
Mhm.
that conversation. And I feel like we're always constantly in that journey of healing.
Mhm.
And yet I'll speak specifically about when I was 33. I suddenly lost my best friend. It was of someone Mary Lou knew as well, Charlotte Maria Gustafsson. And it brought me into this deep underworld place. I might have said that I actually went with her, to the other side. And so for a month, I was just wailing all day long, wailing. Makes me want to cry just actually speaking of it, that time. But after a month, I woke up one day without my eyesight. And there's something about that month of grieving that was so hard on my body that it actually triggered so much inflammation in my brain that went to the hospital and got an MRI and realized they came out with the imaging that they were like, we're really grateful you don't have a tumor in your brain. It's actually, these are lesions, and we think that you have multiple sclerosis. And so, and I, at that moment, didn't even know what multiple sclerosis was. And so began this very, long journey of understanding what it was that I was walking with. At first, I felt like, no, whatever you're calling that, this is actually just my body's reaction to grief. I've just been grieving, and this is how I'm expressing grief. And I had remembered even then, in some of the old books on shamanism, how they would say you had to lose your eyes to be able to see. And so it brought me into that deep time, what I felt so grateful for, to have a time out of time place to grieve. You know, I couldn't work, I barely could walk. And I got to really be in what I call grief territory. So, which is also soul territory, and a place of deep reckoning with life. And some of what healed was, the gift of having this experience that Western medicine called MS, was that it gave me this liminal, almost trance-like experience. I chose not to take the drugs, which I feel would have pulled me out of that experience that I was in, where I felt like I was receiving so much information. One of the greatest teachers in that time, or mentors, or even I would say elders, was old myths and stories, the old initiation stories that supported me in feeling my way through the dark forest, understanding the texture of the underworld, falling in love with night, falling in love with the experience that I was having, so much so that there was grief in leaving that experience, you know? And so I feel multiple sclerosis has been one of my greatest teachers. I've relanguaged it many different ways, but instead of like multiple sclerosis, many scars. So I say, yes, I am the many scarred woman, as Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who was one of my teachers, would say, I come from Scar Clan. And I claim those scars as some of my greatest places of wisdom and life. And the other way that I've relanguaged it is as myself, MS, myself, because it has been such a teacher of boundaries and being able to say no, really understanding my yes and my no. And I've learned so much. I've been such a community tender for most of my life, and MS gave me a real sharp invitation to find the integrity of that relationship with self. And yeah, so it has been a journey of healing. I still feel like I'm discovering more daily. I feel like some of the biggest work for me has been in the mythic world. And I feel like the myth, my myth, that I'm living really is what guided me into grief work, because from that underworld journey, I rose from that journey and with carrying this responsibility, really being able to see how illiterate the culture is in relationship to grief, and how there isn't great tending to the grievers. And especially with chronic illness, I feel like there's so much grief and not a lot of understanding that even is grief. There's so much loss that happens when we lose capacities and abilities and even identities. And so often there's not a place where it belongs, that grief. So I work with all different kinds of grief, but that definitely is a place that I also work, is with people that are grieving that loss, that particular loss.
So much there. There's so many directions I would like to take by questioning. So let me narrow down. My first question would be just a practicality. So you woke up without your eyesight. Were you entirely blind at that point? Or can you tell us what the spectrum of physical symptoms you were experiencing during that time?
Yeah, it was actually, everything was double, and the light was so intense, the intensity of the quality of the light, that I couldn't actually keep my eyes open. And so when they did the testing where the doctor would swing his finger back and forth, my eyes weren't tracking. So there was a lesion that was right next to the optic nerve that had become inflamed because of just the immensity of my experience in relationship to that grief. So yeah, so not totally black, but just not able to keep my eyes open.
There's so much metaphor there.
So much.
Can you tell us some of the particular old stories and myths that guided you while you were in that underworld territory and that were especially meaningful to you?
Do you want me to tell you just the names of the stories? The Handless Maiden was a really big one. Maybe I could tell you. They're too long they're too long to tell here. Maybe I'll tell a short story at the end.
Wow. Well,
But
what culture does the handless maiden come from? Let's start with that.
it's very European, like lots of different places around Europe. And I first heard that story from Clarissa Pinkola Estes, but also Martin Shaw has an incredible version of that story in, I think, his book called Smoke Holes.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure our listeners will be running to the library after this if they're,
And that's an incredible
yeah,
story
the
in
title
relationship.
has me completely grabbed.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there's that one. I also feel like even the story of Persephone and Demeter and Persephone's descent into the underworld, there's all of the stories, like in the initiation stories, Saradwin's stories, the stories of Martin Shaw is an incredible storyteller. And so any story that he tells is a story that I feel like is relevant to. I couldn't see. So I was just listening to stories online, and he actually has a lot of stories online. So does Michael Mead has some stories. Danny Deerdorf has some stories. Clarissa Pinkola Estes has incredible audiobooks with many stories. And yeah, those are a few.
I'll put those in the show notes for anyone listening who is, driving and can't write all that stuff down. But I, yeah, I love that you turned to myth. And I, of course, heard in your story the descent into the underworld and the plutonic element of learning to love the darkness, to be in the dark and to not be afraid, and to go into the underworld with curiosity and courage. One of the really surprising things for me about grief has been that it comes in cycles, it spirals through us. So there will be days when you think, oh, wow, I'm really feeling relief. This is a better day than yesterday or all the days before. And then something will remind you of the loss, the irremediable loss that you're suffering. And in those times, there's this call to fall in love because you're back in it. And there's no point in resisting the inexorable draw of the darkness. No one around you can go with you. Even if they also have experienced great loss, certainly they can empathize, but no one who's not in the middle of their grief portal can really come with you, even though you may try to call them to you.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I really loved that you said that you fell in love with grief. And there's been times in my own grief portal recently that I have been sensing a grief around releasing my grief, where what will replace the amount of time and energy I have made available to myself for the weeping and the writing poems and the prayer? Like what's going to fill this if this goes?
Mm.
Will I forget? If I forget, am I dishonoring the loss itself? Was it not as
Mm.
important as I thought it was?
Yeah. Well, two things come. One is I feel like grief is wild. I sometimes will story it as a wolf, just a wild wolf in my inner landscape. And this wolf, dominant culture wants to domesticate and cage and capture and starve the wolf. And, the practice I feel is really allowing the wolf to be wild. And so she comes when she comes, and we track her and we follow her and howl with her when she's howling. And at that full moon, when there's that energy to howl, like we howl, and there's no rhyme or reason. There's no formula, no agenda, no time frame, no right or wrong. A big part of the work is really allowing grief to belong. And then the other thing that came is that it's like grief is like more than even an emotion. Grief is a capacity within us. And so we grow, like it actually stretches us, like painfully stretches us so that we become bigger. And Francis Weller, who is another teacher of mine, talks about how as we get bigger, we become elders, like what an elder, the definition of an elder is being big enough to hold more, or being big, just being big so that we have the capacity to hold more. And grief stretches us. It's painfully stretches us bigger. So I imagine that in those moments of really falling in love, it sounds like with the poetry, that's the other thing. Grief speaks in metaphor, doesn't like the language of the mind. And so grief is fed in those moments. And it's that falling in love process. It just begins to open those pathways for whenever grief arrives, and that loss, the story of that loss is, those losses in our lives shape us. They are part of our becoming. Like we don't forget them because they are the places in our life that make us who we become in our life for everyone, I would say. So yes, but to savor those moments where the poetry is flowing and is beautiful, exquisite.
There's something very erotic about some of the language that you were using about, pain and stretching and capacity and all that we hold. And I'm just noticing the way like there's the sense of romancing grief and romancing this capacity for life to just break us open that is also combined with this very erotic need to be filled with desire for more life. Like you said, that grief is expanding our capacity. One of the things that like grief creating more grief in me, the grief of what will happen when I lose my grief, I'm recognizing as we're speaking, the eroticism is like to be filled with life, for the poetry not to stop just because the grief is going away, for life to give me so much sensation because grief is incredibly high sensation. And we came here to experience it just as we came to experience love and joy and all these other things. Grief is not the absence of joy or love. It is this companion. They go together.
Yeah, most definitely. They are companions. And you can feel the aliveness in grief. What people feel when they don't feel that aliveness, I would say more is stuck grief, that they're not grieving, that there's not the movement. Grief wants to move, grief through poetry, through dance, through writing, through
Chanting.
Singing, through
Yes.
chanting. There's so many ways that grief wants to move, through tears, through wailing, through keening. Grief wants to move.
I want to return a little bit to the symptomology of MS. I thought it was so amazing that when you said the doctors handed you this diagnosis, you felt immediately this disconnection from it because of the truth that what was behind it was loss. And, in the German New Medicine paradigm that I study, MS is associated with a paralysis of being unable to move. And so the parts of us that we're unable to move are the parts that are most affected in our, for you, it was your eyes. I imagine there are other parts of your body. You mentioned that you couldn't walk. Like the metaphor, obviously, there being like, how do I move forward? If I can't walk, I literally can't go forward. I don't know where to put my feet next. And so yeah, I would love to hear you talk more about this wisdom of the body that came through when you realized that the doctors can call this collection of symptoms anything they want, but the wisdom of the symptoms came from much bigger feelings than, oh, like I have scars in my brain. The scars came from somewhere.
Yeah. Ooh, that's a big question. The scars came from somewhere. I think that just having a background in natural therapeutics, I also had a very strong distrust of the Western medical world. and still do, honestly. And so oftentimes when doctors would talk to me, it just felt like they were speaking a totally different language. And I feel like there is so much to be said about what else is happening there, and what are the root causes. I feel like beyond, and I feel like there's so much in the emotional, spiritual body that I have learned. Yeah, just that idea of not being able to walk and not being able to see, like not being able to see was what brought me the vision. It really gave enough space for the liminal to come in and bring me vision. The not being able to walk really actually stopped me in my tracks, because I had been a pilgrim, like I walked the Camino de Santiago when I was 23, and it really set me on this pilgrim path where I was moving a lot through the world. As Mary Lou knows, I was in and out of New Mexico and Asheville and California and South America and Europe, and just moving a lot. And it was really that journey of MS that stopped me in my tracks and asked me to home myself, to root in to the soils of my own being. And that was, relanguaging it as myself. That was when I actually walked east on the Camino de Santiago. It was after maybe a year after that experience, I realized that I had been walking west for too long. Humanity has been walking west for too long towards the setting sun. If you go to the Camino de Santiago, everyone's walking west. All the arrows point west. You really feel this energetic west. If you go to Finisterre, which is the point furthest on the Camino de Santiago, that furthest point, the fin de la tierra, the end of the earth, people feel so lost there to me. And the metaphor of that, I feel like people always chasing the sun, never letting the sun die, never being able to go through that dark night of the soul, not understanding the capacity, the faculty even, of being able to turn, be impregnated by the light of a new day and walk east towards the new day, but also walk home, carrying the gift that you received and bringing that medicine to your village and to your community. So walking home. So I needed to stop, literally I couldn't walk any further west. I had touched all my edges, of that was my ocean. There was nowhere else to walk. I had to stop there to be able to turn and understand the energies of walking east. And that's a big journey. That Camino was really hard walking east. I did go walk east, and walking against the current, of everybody walking west was not easy. And it's still not, I still feel that journey, but I feel like that's kind of the path of the salmon, to go give your body to the top of the mountain so that there is food for all of life. So yeah, I do feel like there is a lot in the actual symptomology that speaks to us, and that gives us a real invitation into what our soul is asking of us.
I want to ask you one more question about your symptoms, and that is, when you said that you saw double, and you had also said that you felt like you went with your friend when she died, at least for that first month. I wonder if in the seeing double, if you ever felt like you were seeing for the both of you because you were still on this side.
I never considered that, but I love that imagination. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for gifting me that. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, just to, I haven't had that thought, but when in that month that I really felt like I was journeying with her, it felt like I was like in such a liminal place and receiving so many images of her, and she was not happy. She did not want to die. She was pregnant. She had a 4-year-old. She had a beautiful community. She did not want to die. And so there was a lot of grief tending and just this real, hard journey for her to make that passage. And, we live in such a death illiterate culture as well. And we were so young, to know how to support a soul in moving across like that kind of psychopomp role. I didn't know those words back then. I didn't know the chance to sing to her, how to feed her journey, how to really encourage her to move across. Yeah, so there was a lot I didn't know. And I think that our community did it the best that we could. And it was a beautiful death. And it was hard. It was a really hard death for all of us. But I do feel like it is possible that I was seeing double, that was perhaps a form of support for her. Who knows? I don't know. But I can imagine that there was something beyond my scope of knowing.
I think I want to commend that you did know what to do. You know it in your bones, you know it in your DNA. And what I witnessed during that time was you rising up into that innate wisdom that I believe we all carry, though some of us, I think, are closer to feeling it than others. And you are someone who really stepped into that. You held vigil for days with that fire. You prepared her body. You bathed her and made her beautiful. You covered her in resins and incense, and you put her into the pyre of the crematorium. You absolutely knew what to do. Part of my grief of just living in this time is our continual disconnection from what is already within us and believing that we need experts and we need more than we do to channel that. And you did such an amazing job of just stepping into it. You didn't need any certificates. You didn't need any names of bigwigs who have podcasts and books. You did it for us, Siobhan. You had it in you and you helped us. So thank you.
I'm in tears. Yeah. It's true. There was some knowing that I just loved her so much that I wanted to stand as best as I could to support the most beautiful death that we could give her. And listen, I was listening. It was like, yes, of course I have to go push her into the fire. No one wanted to do that.
Listening.
And yeah, it felt like, so there was just this listening of, no, somebody needs to be there with her. Somebody needs to actually make offerings to that fire. So to be able to thank the fire and throw in chocolate and cornmeal and just to sing as we pushed her in. My sister came with me because she didn't want me to go alone. Yeah. So it was beautiful, to anoint the body and to invite the 4-year-old in, to come say goodbye, to give a gift. That Alyssa actually supported Lon and really encouraging that. But yeah, there were people that knew in their bones, and that had experienced different ways of tending death. And we're learning together, we're listening for the wisdom. And, I think that there's miles to go. But yeah, I think, there's many of us that do want to lean in to it and learn how to tend that threshold. Thanks for saying it.
Again, I would say you did know, and I'm glad you've taken it further. And, I generationally stand in this place of having been raised in a big extended Irish Catholic family where there were still intact wake practices and intact home death practices and staying up 3 days keening and laughing and wailing and screaming at each other and laughing with each other and all expressing. And you took it even further than, I think sometimes when you're in a culture where it's regimented and this is what we do, the juice is not as present. I do really want to commend you in that. And I think that's something that if I could somehow make a homeopathic remedy and put it in the water supply of people to remember we know in our bones what to do. We know in our shining DNA what to do. And thank you again for modeling that and doing such a stellar job for all of us during that time.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so welcome. Yeah, I feel like the most important thing to say is do something, you know, just lean in and, you know, just let spirit guide you there.
Yes.
We do know what to do. It's in our bones. It's in our ancestry. We do know what to do. Thank you.
And then as we, you know, as been said a few times in this conversation, then you enter that grief space, which is an existentially alone space and I do not believe that the acuteness of grief is a social space any more than I believe labor is a social space. I think that you have to do it yourself. And part of what we're reckoning with is that separation, that existential separation that we come in with and that we feel every time we grieve, right? So that piece is harder to support a community in that, right? Like we broke apart and we're all in our own underworld experience, which is going to be tailored to our personal needs.
Yeah. I love what you said, Mary Lou, about how there are cultures with intact grief practices, and there could be a loss of juice in the practice if we're going through the motions according to rules. And I loved in your story how you were talking about listening, Siobhan, because maybe you didn't have model for, okay, now it's time to make offerings to this fire that's consuming my best friend. But knowing at the time that it needed to be done, I feel like there's this opportunity in grief to become really childlike. And part of the listening is feeling the impulse inside of you to play. You know, there's this like duality between the incredible pomp and circumstance and gravity of honoring loss or grief, mixed with the spontaneity and childlikeness of when the song comes through me, I'm going to sing it. When the tears well up, I'm not going to fight them. I'm going to surrender to the impulse and the intuition that like, the cornmeal wants to be thrown into the fire now. And that's not something that anybody, told me like on the seventh day, then we do this. But to just be with the creativity that grief can offer when you're really listening. It's not really a question, it's a comment, but
I was just thinking the creativity of the creativity of ritual. And I would just add just one piece, which is animism. You know, when we believe that things are alive, like that fire, you know, then it's disrespectful, it feels, to just have it work for us, do this thing, to be able to thank it and feed it. I feel like then it actually is going to have a different kind of relationship with that body than it might have if you don't thank it and acknowledge that it's alive. Like that's part of my holding of the world, is just like the water, that the fire is alive, and the earth and the trees and and a big part of the grief work that I do is like when you start to feel, and this will go into what Mary Lou's comment, when you start to really feel the world alive, you are never alone. You are never alone in your grief. Like there is always the wild earth that is holding you. And I do believe solitude and silence is so essential in that time. And yet we are relational beings. Even if we think that we're alone, we are held just by gravity. We belong to this earth. We are held by the earth. There's always that embrace. The song of the river for me is so powerful for grieving, to just be in that movement of the river. We're never alone. To be in with a tree and feel that rootedness and the experience of the underworld, and the energy in the roots and the cycles of the tree, the rising and setting of the sun. I feel like the wild world is constantly with us, and humans especially modern humans are like so terrible with being able to hold grief in a good way. They're always trying to fix it or solve it or they're so uncomfortable themselves with your grief that there's like this incongruence. There's very few humans that can go down into soul with you. So it's not, oh, I'm sorry and I'm pitying you because you're grieving, but it's actually, oh, like I am going to feel the depths of where you are with you. I'm with you in that. Mm-hmm. Because it's a beautiful place to go and it's a direction down that humans need to know, right? We're so addicted to going up. We're so addicted to rising and light that people are so uncomfortable when people are grieving. And so it makes sense that we don't want to grieve with people. There's so many people that don't have that kind of that literacy.
Mm-hmm. Hope I'm not personalizing this to our community too much, but I'm going to say again, thank you for midwifing us through that time and how, what an amazing karmic connection you and Shalota had, that she, your relationship with her brought this full vocation that obviously is something you were born to do into fruition in this world. And pertaining to what you just said about not everyone wants to go deep, I'm remembering after the big service for Shalota, where the whole, hundreds and hundreds of people there, was standing room only. This was such a beloved woman who, to know Shalota was to love her, right? And that she was just, she was like a saint. I really view her as just such a incredible being that we all got to interact with. And after that service, the community split into the people who wanted to go drink at the bar. And then you almost instantly decided, no, let's go have a fire. And I was so honored to have that at my house. And you made a fire pit and you created this fire where we could, those of us who weren't going to be tended properly by drinking beer at a brewery, could go and have that part of what we needed as a community. And that remains one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, of how everybody there just channeled exactly what needed to be channeled, that we hadn't planned that. And I remember someone, I think it might have been Janice, just brought 3 rotisserie chickens, and we're all just like ripping chicken apart and eating it with our hands. Like, it was so raw. Kimmy was making a stew with just whatever she found in my house, and it was so beautiful, and throwing like osha roots in there and making, like, she just made this like witchy pot of stew for everybody. There was so much singing. And again, that came through you. You knew how to tend to yourself and all of us in that space. So really honor your soul's vocation in this and how you have let it come through. And none of us would have wished that opportunity for it to express itself. It just was not an experience that any of us would have asked to have brought upon us, but brought so much beauty. And it really, for me, like witnessing you stepping into this is so incredible, that it's what you're born to do.
Yeah, it's definitely it's my staff to carry. That's the way that I say it. It's not where I thought I would have been, but it was definitely where I've been led. And I just wanted to say that about that circle and the singing and the eating and the just knowing, it would have been so incongruent for me to be at a brewery. Yeah. And I think that's the piece that I was just saying before. It's really having the discernment. It's more about the quality of togetherness, because togetherness can be so beautiful in grief. But it's the quality, and it has to be deep enough to be able to meet that kind of soul territory and the depths of our being, to actually be living in the kind of brewery world. It would totally disconnect me from where I actually was. It would have been a form of like dissociation.
Right. It's not my medicine either. So I was so grateful that another path opened up.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Totally.
So can we hear more of how the journey of carrying these scars has gone for you, and being the many scarred woman? How has that story progressed?
Well, specifically like the MS journey.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't
mind.
mind that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I had my second major attack 2 years after the first one. I had moved to Boulder. I moved here with a partner, and it was a hard landing in a new place. And, I'd moved from Asheville, which was so beautiful and green, and the community was so incredible there. And I was so deeply woven in. And so to be in such a grief process and to be having this new experience with my body and to move to a new place, there was a lot of grief in it all. And then my partner and I broke up, and I decided to walk the Camino de Santiago East. And then a few months after that Camino walk, I had my second journey. And I was like, oh, this is like a real thing. Like, again, waking up with the double vision, because it had subsided, I think there was maybe just about a month that I didn't have eyesight, and maybe 3 months that it was hard to fully walk, to feel my vitality probably back 6 months. But that second one kind of felt like I was in a lot of denial that I actually had what they called MS, And so that second journey was really what brought me into this conversation with the myself. That was where that really began. And I started doing a lot of work, both with my emotional landscape as well as my physical, like doing actually a lot of cleansing and going to see all the kooky doctors is what I call them. Like I'm not so interested in the Western way that they work with autoimmune disorders, and just it doesn't make any sense to me to suppress the immune system, your greatest defense. And so, and even like the steroids that they give you right there in the beginning doesn't make sense either, because I feel like it pulls you out of that liminal space, which I feel like has information for you, similar to birth. I feel like it's like you actually want to know where you are, or I wanted to know where I was. And I felt like there was more information there than I could get not there, not in the depths of that world. But yeah, that really brought me on the soul journey, which is what then birthed the grief work. And now I would say I haven't had a major episode since then. I had those two major episodes, but I have a relationship with my body now that is just so very different than it was before, where I feel like I listen to my body, you know? Whereas like in my early 20s and 30s, I was studying natural therapeutics and ate, all the diet, like wild raw foodist. But now it's more of a relationship that is not about a mind relationship. It's actually a body relationship where there's much more care and kindness. And after that second episode, there was like a little bit of an entry into kind of a little neuroses around like finding all the things and doing all the things. And I think that health you can get kind of neurotic, like finding the best curing the thing. And so to come into relationship with that as well, and find that like healing is more important than curing, like very different from each other, that it's not necessarily about the symptomology for me anymore as much as it is about the relationship with myself and my being. So I do have symptoms every once in a while that I'm unsure if they're MS related. I've decided not to do an MRI for many years because I just hate them, honestly. And I will ask myself, what are you going to do with that information if you receive that information? Like just to know, just for your brain to know something. And so I just do the best that I can to take as good of care of my body as I can. It's like this one vessel that we're given. It's so precious, Clarissa Pinkola Estes has a beautiful book called The Joyous Body. It's an audio book. And one of the things that she says is like the body is like one of our greatest companions, in this life. And we talk to it sometimes so bad, and it's innocent. It's like a child. Would you tell a child, like, you can wait to pee?
Yeah.
Or like, you're thirsty, but you can wait.
Yeah.
No, you would most likely get a glass of water for the child. And so to feed this body, I'm in a place right now where I'm just like, oh yeah, like I want to give you like the best food for you. Like, I don't want to eat this packaged food that is like devoid of any nutrients for you just because it tastes good. No, like it's just not interesting to me anymore. It feels much more kind to just really enjoy tending this vessel, with as much love and care and curiosity and listening again as possible.
I have a question for both of you as women who have had a healing path with what gets called autoimmune illness. So I walk in a lot of worlds. I speak a lot of languages in the medical system. My allegiance is not to allopathic medicine, but I carry a license to practice that way. I call myself a folk Catholic animist. I very much in the world of the stories and the animate nature of reality. So I think that there's a lot of interrogation we can do about our current stories around diagnoses. And I try to tell my patients, this is not always received well, that this is just our current mythology around what the body's doing. Yes. And it's not any more real than if we pull out medical texts from the early 1800s or from the medieval times or the ancient Greeks, where we know from history that almost certainly, 200 years from now, people are going to think the way we viewed everything was not correct at best, crazy at worst. So what are your personal interpretations or feelings about the current storytelling that autoimmunity is the body attacking itself, the immune system attacking the self?
I don't think that the body attacks itself. I actually think that a lot of the autoimmune disorders are virus related. I think that there's viruses moving through the body all the time. I think it's unique to each body too. I think that's why people with MS, even the neurologists, are like, we don't really know what's happening here. But viruses are brilliant. They are so brilliant, and they know how to hide, and they know how to mimic tissue in the body. I think that there is a place where the immune system is trying to get the virus. It is trying to protect us. And I think that even when you get rid of the virus, that when there is inflammation in the body, that there is the place where the immune system is thinking that's the virus, so there is a way that the immune system is involved. But I feel like it's like our immunity is our greatest defense. It feels much more generative to boost the immunity, and to get the immune system stronger than finding ways, to inhibit its capacity. That's my personal holding of that question. But I'd love to hear your ideas.
Well, I loved what you said, that the body does not attack itself. And that was, I think, one of the first ways in for me in terms of disidentifying as someone with 5 autoimmune diseases, just no longer identifying as a diseased person, because my body never attacks me. My body is always acting in my best interest. My body is wise. It's intelligent, it's intuitive, and every single thing that it does is seeking stasis and replenishment and regeneration. So I don't think the body attacks itself. And I don't know that I even believe in the immune system at all anymore. I think that immunity could be, we could, to relanguage that, we could think about the resiliency system and the ways that our body is well positioned to filter everything that comes into our field psychically, energetically, and physically, whether that's our food, the type of light or electric radiation that we're exposed to, all the toxins in the environment, and all the
all the microbes, all of that. Our body is so well positioned to take and integrate everything that comes at us because we are a part of all of that. We're not separate. And I even don't, I love what you said about viruses. I don't really know that much about virology, so I'm not going to sit here and say that like that. I think there's probably like a ton of truth to what you were saying about viruses, and you have probably studied this. Sounds like you know what you're talking about. But I think at this point, I don't believe that viruses or bacteria are problematic at all. I think that they exist with us and within us as renters or neighbors. They're like
Yeah.
in our biodome in the ecosystem of our body, and their presence is largely helpful and reparative in that all these microscopic life forms are moving tissue, and our body will generate all sorts of extra tissue to regenerate what's been damaged, and then that bacteria will eat it away. So just the way that we know about the bacteria in our stomach and how it is crucial to us being able to digest. We can't do any digestion without bacteria. So
Yes.
so that's my take on life forms. But yeah, I just think that I want to go back to what you said about diagnostics, because I think one of the biggest things for me in releasing my disease identity was refusing surveillance, refusing submitting myself for full body x-rays and blood tests and all these diagnostics. And I really want to invite anyone who has an autoimmune diagnosis or any type of diagnosis to really consider, exactly like you said, what am I going to do with this information? To be told that there is something awry in my body may just facilitate further stories of my inadequacy, when in actuality, if you have scars on your skin, we look at those and we say, good job, body. You plugged the gap, you filled the hole, we're not bleeding out. And, what if the doctor says, oh, you've got more scars on your brains? That means you've got more lesions, you've got more things wrong with you. The disease is progressing, rather than, yes, my brain is scarring over. All these lesions are healing. Whatever trigger that caused this to appear in the first place, surely that's not great, but we're fully integrating it because the brain is responding with scar tissue, and scar tissue is a sign of healing. And that may be a grotesque oversimplification according to any type of doctor, but what I like about telling these gross oversimplifications is that stories mean everything to us. And if we tell a story that our body's doing something wrong, or it's not up to snuff, or it can't handle the ebbs and flows and the storms of life, we will watch that bear out. And like you, I've had a few autoimmune symptom flares since releasing the majority of my symptoms. Every time I say to myself, oh, is this my body attacking itself again? Am I becoming disabled again? I can see the swelling and inflammation in my joints. Does that mean that my arthritis has come back? I am holding myself apart from the greater truth, which is that I came here to heal the whole time. Until I die, I'm going to keep healing. There's no end to the healing journey. And just like there's no end to grief, why would I want to stop healing? Why would I want to live a life where there's no more grief? If I did, then I would be already dead. And when I'm dead, I'm sure I'll be really happy to be reunited with God. But until I'm there, I want to be really pumped about all that life is throwing my way now. Like, all these experiences are happening for me and with me, not as if I were a victim to them. So yeah, that's my take on diagnostics. I just think that everyone should really consider,
Yeah.
oh, what information can you really get from that? And when you get that information, what story will you then use that diagnostic to tell? because the story makes all the difference in terms of how much gratitude you can summon within you for the ups and downs of life.
Beautiful.
Thanks.
One thing that I just want to say in response to what you just said is that, the thing about viruses is that they have always lived with us as an evolutionary part of our being. And, you can even see that in my whole mythology of that whole experience of MS, and MS really being the teacher, was such a big part of what brought me into my becoming, and so we could call it whatever we want, but it was what really catalyzed a particular opening for me, and deepening, I would say, a deepening into who I am as a human, so that I could offer the gifts that I have to offer. So I always say to MS, thank you.
Thank you. I could
Like
not
deep
agree
bow.
more. Yes, I love the gifts that arthritis has brought into my life. I am in full surrender to the wisdom of the arthritis experience. I feel like, yeah, without that, I would never have woken up to just how free I am, how sovereign, how valuable my life is. I am so grateful to disease for showing me the value of my life and my body.
I would like to talk about viruses because I'm a lover of mythology, and I am so grateful to get to interact with these other conscious demigods on this, in this crazy realm where we're here living our mythic stories. And I think if we acknowledge viruses exist, even the way modern scientific medicine does, what is a virus but an animate story? It is a little package of genetic material that enters you and wants you to tell it over and over again, to replicate it, right? So it's a little unhealthy story that you're telling over and over again, that might lead you to a really good place. And think of how when we're healing from an experience, we know we're healed because we don't tell the story anymore, right? That, like, if I've had this terrible breakup with somebody who was messing with my mind, I need to tell all my friends about it, maybe for years. Like, you're going to hear about my story. I need to keep telling my story. Like, I still have the viral aspect of that story affecting me. I need to replicate it. I'm not done expressing it. And I know I've healed when I don't even tell that story anymore. I don't even know if I remember how to tell it. So I really appreciate what we call viruses on that level of this little story that wants to be expressed over and over again. It wants us to really express it. And I love it that, we acknowledge that the story medicine healed you while you were in that underworld experience. The stories that are being told by others, we acknowledge how a story changes as a verbal story in an oral tradition changes as it moves through storyteller to storyteller, just as a virus changes as it moves through person to person. So in that sense, they're here as part of our mythic journey, and in my interpretation of whatever this is we're living through.
Yes.
I love that. I love that what you said about the expression, like in the way that we can't hold in a sneeze, like it has to happen. There's a time period and there's a part of every grief portal that is the demand for expression. And imagine holding in a sneeze, like trying not to cry. I think about like law of attraction teachers who are just like, get in the high vibe, don't go down, don't focus on the negative and, focus only on the positive. As if we could stifle a sneeze, there's no way to bypass the part where you just, you have to vomit up the horrible story. And otherwise it can't be cleared, internalizing that, shoving it down does not make it move through you quicker. There's a point. I mean, there's certainly a point where you're just like milking your bad feelings, but there's a crucial middle ground where we just have to let the bad feeling be so bad. Just let it be so bad.
That's one of the beauties of natural therapeutics, right, Siobhan, of the appreciation of the full acute expression.
Totally. I love the viruses as storytellers, Mary Lou. I definitely take that with me, just telling the same story until you actually listen to it, until you listen to the story, and then it has that being met, and then that's the evolutionary capacity. Okay, there you go. Now I can leave. Your terrain has changed.
Yeah.
There you go. There you go. Oh, it's so, and grief, like Jocelyn said, I'm sure you would also say, Siobhan, it is such a spiraling path. And every time I discuss grief, I think of my own griefs. I feel some of my own things, and listening to you talk about how you just fully expressed it acutely at the time, and the wailing. I still have a piece where I judged my grief as a young woman when I was grieving my mother, and how my expression was to run and run. Very like, I'm not going to feel it. I am not dipping my toe in that infinite well of grief. I am not getting anywhere near that, because I don't know if I'll come back. If I let myself shed one tear, it's going to be, I'm in it forever. And it was the Persephone story that helped me as well. And for me, it was this inversion of the Persephone story, of having this experience of understanding that I wasn't meant to still be above ground during that time. And here I am, like, trying to be united with my mother, who has just died. She's not up here. She's not up here. And the only way to resolve is to let death literally abduct me, literally take me over, and surrender to being pulled into the underworld. That's the only way to actually have the process that I needed to have. But I have to honor that running as well, as just that, that obviously was the story that I needed to be living at the time.
Yeah, that's,
well, I'll say that. Yeah, I mean,
normal reaction.
Dominant culture paradigm is terrified of grief, and it makes sense why too, because we don't have an intact village culture that knows an eldership, right? I love that Stephen Jenkinson always talks about how there were no elders that came over in the boats with the colonizers. Like, we live in a culture that we don't have elders. We've never had elders. We don't know how to make elders. We've lost that capacity. And so in the poverty of not having that eldership and that mentorship, well, we don't know what to do with grief. And so there's this way of like hyper protecting ourselves, running, avoiding at all costs, like the terror of what that might be. And so we're reimagining this. It's very, pioneer in some ways for our culture to begin to not even take from other cultures, but to really reimagine a way of relating to this enormous human experience that each one of us is going to meet in a way that is generative, that is beautiful. And even the pain, like, it's like that there's something, and the discomfort and the terror, that we get to meet all of those territories with each other and find ways of, just like the little viruses, giving it expression, letting it express itself. And
and there is so much healing and beauty whenever people whose hearts are cracked open and in that grief space can just sit with each other and be like, the initiated, right? When you meet them, when you sit with them, or when you are grieving, if you're lucky, someone who has been initiated in that way will show up to sit with you, because that's who you need.
Yeah.
It's
true.
I'm just thinking of the connection with MS and kind of the psycho-spiritual element that we were talking about earlier, of being stuck or unable to move forward. And there's something that is really inherent in grief of being unable to move forward. It suppresses our fight or flight and puts us into a free state. And I think that part of what I've been learning in my own grief portal these past few months is that the more that I permission my grief, the more that I make space actively to be in grief and to withdraw from others, or to allow others to witness me, which is way worse. To be held while you're crying.
the more that I permission the grief, the more old grief comes up too. And the spiral continues. And what I'm learning is if I say it's okay to actually be like really fucked up that my cat died, like he was just a cat, he was just a little man, you know? But when I like really allow myself to feel that loss as deeply as it actually feels, I am conjuring ghosts who didn't get the reverence and honor that they deserved because I didn't have the capacity. And when you were talking about how grief stretches us and opens us to hold greater and greater capacity, I was thinking of that because something that's come up for me since my cat died is I'm hearing from my grandma. I hear from my grandma a lot, but my grandma's been appearing in my dreams often. And I'm also like reliving past breakups and being in the just the vastness of all the people who have left or all the failures that I've had. And I'm just trying to make the point that there's something really important about acknowledging the free state, which is a natural part, and then giving way to allowing the grief to come through. And like Mary Lou, you said, if I dip my toe into the bottomless well of grief, like I'll never get out, it'll never end. I feel that so hard because grief begets more grief. It brings up all the other grieving, all you think you're done grieving something. My grandma died 10 years ago, and there is still grief in there. There is still more to release of like how just like how lonely it is to not have her earth side anymore.
You will never stop loving your grandma. And so
Yeah.
until the day that you die, that grief is going to walk with you. And that's part of that we grow bigger to be able to hold, that grief, but it will walk with you your whole life. One of the things that in the online pilgrimages that I do is I do a descanso project, which I learned from Clarissa Pinkola Estes as well, where we stake into the ground. We just identify all of the losses that we've lived through in our life, and we give them a resting place, so that they don't follow us around like ghosts, but that a place that we can go and make offerings to, right? That we can feed, that we can sing to, so that we actually are in a relationship with those losses. I do believe that when we're grieving, it takes us down into grief territory, so it's like we have access to all the unmetabolized grief that's down there because it's soul work. And so it wants to bring you into a place of moving some of that, creating those altars and feeding those altars, singing to them. It's giving that opportunity to metabolize, to chew a little bit more on that, experience, that love, and then be able to take another step, in life with it. So I feel like we as humans, and especially in the modern culture, we have such unmetabolized grief, not only from our own lifetime, but from all the many lifetimes that's passed down through us, through the generations. It lives within us. So yes, endless grief that lives, in these beings. It's endless, and it needs to have expression because it just continues to build. And if we don't give it that attention and offer it a place, those tears to come, then we pass it down to the next generation too. So in some ways it is a real form of activism to lean into grief. It's soul activism. That's what Francis Weller would call it, soul activism.
And
it really it's courageous, but
it's the only way. It's like birth. If it's going to happen in a non-medicalized, non-pathologized way, you have to completely surrender to it. Right. And that's certainly not the norm in our culture. That is not how 99% of births are occurring, but that is what should be normal. Right. And then the same with grief. Like you have to merge with the endlessness, which is where the beauty is, because the infinite is so that's the transcendence. That's the, the connection to the ineffable, that that fear of getting lost in it, if you can view that as an invitation to get lost in it, is where the healing happens.
Yeah. Lost in it, surrender. Well, the wild thing too is that it actually can't last. Like when you really give yourself space to fully feel as deep as the loss is, it lasts and then it gives way to another emotion. You cannot stay in the eternal well. It just, even if you wanted to romance and eroticize that grief, because it feels so good to be cracked open, it will always merge and morph into a new sensation.
We are cyclical. We're cyclical beings. It's not linear, so we go through the winter and then the earth turns and we meet spring. It's like a natural occurrence. We don't turn the earth, it happens. And then we're in spring, but it doesn't mean that we're not going to meet another winter, and they talk a lot about the waves with grief, it's like that, like it peaks and then it crashes you down and it, becomes part of the ocean again. And then there's the next one. And so we learn to belong it all, that's the biggest part of the work that I do is like the compassion, learning to belong wherever it is that we find ourselves in that experience, no matter how long ago the loss was. We just meet it rather than, story it as good or bad or right or wrong or black or white. It's just, okay, here you are, and I'm going to meet you and lean in.
Thank you, Siobhan. This has been one of our best eps. I'm going to go ahead and say it. I say that about all our eps, but damn, this one slapped.
Thank you so much, Siobhan.
So grateful to just share this afternoon conversation and story.
Thank you.
Such an
honor.
honor.
I feel like I learned so much too about, I love your all's devotion to health and nutrition. I don't know what you do, Jocelyn, really, but I could feel your expertise in the world of body. So,
I'm just a healer, I'm just out here healing my own illnesses. I'm a fucking astrologer. I don't do anything, but I do think about this stuff a lot.
Yeah, well, you can tell. And I always love listening to you, Mary Lou, too, and your wisdom and the metaphors and the mythic way that you can hold both science and, the witchiness. So appreciate you.
Well, it's so mutual, Siobhan. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us. And I will see you next month.
Okay, sounds good. Excited. All right.
Okay.
Sisters, talk to you soon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the How I Healed podcast. We are so happy to have you. If you liked this podcast, please consider sharing it with a friend. Like it, subscribe to us on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. We are so excited to receive your feedback. So do drop us a line at howihealedpodcast@gmail.com if you would like to send us a message. You can also reach us on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, all the usual spots. So thanks again for tuning in and for supporting our project.